Okay, now turning to our program, Chuck Radel, Senior Vice President of Town Bank, is going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today, Steve Wallace, who is the founder and president of Omanhene Bean Company. He oversees the strategic direction of Omanhene and divides his time between here in the U.S. and in Ghana, which is in West Africa. Steve also serves as the North American project manager for Niche Cocoa and was instrumental in bringing to Wisconsin the largest African food and beverage foreign direct investment in U.S. history with their New Franklin location, which he'll be telling us more about. Previously, Steve spent the summer of 1978 in Ghana as an AFS high school foreign exchange student. Then he returned back at age 29 to start the company, which is the first entity to sustain exports of gourmet chocolate and cocoa products made entirely in Africa. The company has been recognized by the United Nations Global Compact for its path-breaking business model and corporate citizenship. Prior to starting the company, Steve worked in broadcasting as an attorney, both of those in Washington, D.C., and then as a vice president of Mid-State Sportswear. He can tell us a little bit more about the AFS, but he was recently elected president of the AFS Foundation. Steve was recognized by President Jimmy Carter and former Ambassador Shirley Temple Black for his entrepreneurial accomplishments. He was invited to the World Economic Forum on Africa and was selected as an inaugural TED Global Fellow in 2007. He enjoys teaching and has been invited to speak at many universities, including Harvard, Princeton, and many here in Wisconsin, including UW, UWM, Alverno, and Marquette. He earned his bachelor's degree, magna cum laude from Phi Beta Kappa from Brown University, and has his law degree from the University of Chicago Law School. Steve was born and raised in Whitefish Bay, and we know his mom is here with us. He now lives 3 blocks from where he grew up, and when he looks out in his backyard, he can see where his father grew up, adjacent to his house. He is married. His wife Linda is an attorney, and they have 3 grown children. The twins, Hannah and Josh, are 32, and Ben is 26. Please give a warm Rotary welcome to Steve Wallace.
Thank you all. Thank you, Chuck, for such a beautiful introduction. And to Mary, where's Mary McCormick? Is she here? She was one of the people who also extended a wonderful introduction to Aaron as well. You've all made me feel very special to be here today, so I'm been taken very good care of. Maya, your invocation was lovely and unexpected. I will try to live up to it. And I have to say I'm delighted to see Frank Gimbel here. Frank Gimbel, over 40 years ago, indoctrinated me into the State Bar of Wisconsin when I passed the bar. So he was the one, he was State Bar president. I had to raise my hand and swear my allegiance to Frank Gimbel, which is always a good thing to do. So I wanted to thank all of you, not only for the invitation, but to offer congratulations on 110 years. Organizations can be very fragile. To last that long is remarkable, and you've made the world a smaller, a kinder, a safer, and a more peaceful place because of your activities. Your focus on international affairs, which we heard about, I'm in awfully good company when I think about the people you've invited before. But your focus on international affairs, your support of student exchanges and international professional exchanges, from freshwater to engineering exchanges recently, is nothing short of exceptional. Nothing short of exceptional. And I think our city, our state, our nation, and the world owes you a debt of gratitude. So thank you. Now, your interest in international affairs, really laudable. It's something I join, but sometimes I feel like now we're going to be in the minority because it's not always a popular position to be involved in international affairs, maybe especially recently. So we're going to talk about that. So today I want to talk about globalism. I want to talk about Ghana and the potential of Africa. You know, Henry Luce famously said that the 20th century was the American century. It's the American century. But I think the 21st century is not going to belong to China, nor India. But by the last half of the 21st century, I think it'll be the African century. And I think that's due to a lot of reasons, not the least of which Africa is a very young continent. Most of the people who live there are under 30. And I think youth always has an impetus and bends towards social justice and innovation and progress. So don't be surprised if we see by the end of the 21st century, those of us lucky enough to make it all the way there, that Africa may hold a very special place. And then finally, I want to discuss comparative advantage in international trade, business attraction here in Wisconsin, and I want to see if we can't possibly dispel the existing narrative of the direction that trade and engagement often goes in Africa. For many years, the narrative was places like America would subsidize or send money or aid to Africa because it was a poor continent. But I think that's changing, and I think Milwaukee's going to play a very special role in flipping that narrative, and we'll get to that in a minute. But let me start with the name of my company. Omanhene is the title of a person. It's like the Pope. It is the paramount chief. So in Ghana to this day, you have village chiefs, you have regional chiefs, but the top chief, the paramount chief's name is the title is called the Omanhene. So and to this day, the Omanhene is the repository of moral and ethical authority. So I wanted to name our chocolate company after that. So globalism, is a little bit under attack. In the 1940s and 1950s, globalism was universally thought of as a good thing. It's how we decided to repair the world after World War II. The Marshall Plan, we were going to invest in Europe, we were going to trade with Europe, we were going to loan money to our enemies and our allies alike and try to rebuild it. And the theory was that if we were trading with countries, we wouldn't be shooting at them in the future. So globalism was sort of universally thought as a good thing. Fast forward to 1999, and globalism all of a sudden became a shorthand for sort of economic exploitation. It's the exploitation of labor, sort of a race to the bottom. So we see just the word globalism is taken on a tinged meaning. It's now sort of freighted with, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Okay? An introduction to my company and where we are. Of course, we're in Africa. We're in the Bight of Benin. Ghana used to be called the Gold Coast. It was a former British colony. There it is. And one of the things it does is grow a lot of cocoa and a lot of very fine cocoa. Any given year, it's the first or second largest producer of cocoa in the world. And the cocoa, the wealth of Ghana, comes from just this little bit. Maybe 20% of the country grows the cocoa. And we use that cocoa to make hot chocolate in mochas and mochachinos and frappuccinos and all the kind of wonderful drinks you enjoy when you go to a cafe. So that's the end product. And if we're lucky enough, you can go to a cafe. This is at O'Hare's International Airport. We get a little menu credit. You say Omanhene hot chocolate. So that's a good day for us when I can go out and see that kind of thing. But I want you to maybe close your eyes for a minute and pretend you're the president of Ghana. If you open your eyes, this is going to be your airplane. It's not quite Air Force One, but it's still pretty nice. That's the official aircraft for the president of Ghana. And life is good for you if you're president of Ghana, because Ghana grows reputedly the finest cocoa in the world, and it grows a lot of it. In fact, 40% in any given year of your foreign exchange revenues, if you want to build a new airport or hospitals or roads or schools, comes from revenues derived from the sale of cocoa abroad. But here's the problem. The price of cocoa is volatile. You can see it goes up 4x times. It's either $800 in one year or $3,200 in another year. So when I've spoken at universities, but I really enjoy speaking most to elementary schools or high schools. And when I talk about what would you think if your allowance went up or down by 4x, it's really hard to say for things. And not only that, it's volatile, but you lose over time if you're president of Ghana. What that means, you see here the volatility again. It goes from under $1,000 a metric ton to over almost $3,500. And that can be because speculators in London or New York are hedging cocoa futures, or perhaps in neighboring Cote d'Ivoire, there's a drought and then there's a shortage of supply and the price goes up. And you can just see how volatile it is over time. But here's you growing. The green line is going to be cocoa, the amount of cocoa in tons that's grown. And you can see it's pretty consistent until people get wind that there's a price spike. So what do? They start planting more cocoa. And all of a sudden the supply goes up. And it takes a couple years, but sure enough, over time, when those trees mature and the harvest takes place, supply goes up, price goes down. This is sort of classic economics 101, and it's what happens in cocoa. So the price of cocoa is volatile and you lose over time. And then the final indignity. This is a chocolate bar that's sold in Japan. It's the Hershey bar of Japan. Very popular, and it uses the name Ghana. But it's not made in Ghana. It's not even made with cocoa beans that are grown in Ghana. So here you have a very prosperous country of Japan and a company making a lot of money using your name, your brand, your patrimony, and benefiting from it. So this is the sort of indignity that you can feel. Problem is, it's because Ghana traditionally has been at the bottom of the value chain. So if you look at the blue boxes, these are just steps on the value chain. At the very bottom is a cocoa bean. A single cocoa bean is not worth a lot. But if you turn it into cocoa liquor or butter or cocoa powder drink mix, as you move up the value chain, you create value. But of course, we have to have factories to do that and train people. And at the top of the value chain, once we make our chocolate and we sell it to a pastry chef, then all of a sudden it becomes a chocolate dessert that could have great value as it sits on a dessert plate at a fine restaurant or hotel. Again, the value lies up on the value chain. If you look at we had a gift box. It cost about $28 online. And in the best year, when the cocoa was going for over $3,000, the value of cocoa in that was about $1.50. And the other $26.50 was the recipe developing, the packaging, the sales, the expressing of the beans into cocoa liquor and butter, the recombining of the butter and the liquor, the purchase of milk, the purchase of sugar. And all of that is where the value lies. So I started thinking about, having lived in Ghana when I was 16, could Ghana possibly move up that value chain and not simply be a country that grew cocoa beans? That was going to be the disruptive innovation. And another way of thinking about this is to ask the question, not where good cocoa comes from, but where good chocolate comes from. And when I ask people where good chocolate comes from, they'll say Switzerland or Belgium grows wonderful chocolate. But I'd ask you to consider how many cocoa trees grow in Zurich. Not one. So there's this sort of dilemma in the whole value chain for chocolate. So how do we do it? Our theory, we all know that good design creates value. And whether it's a Birkin bag or a Rolex watch, good design creates something you can actually bank on and feed families with. And for us, design is not only the branding or necessarily the packaging, it's the technical attributes. Does our cocoa powder go into solution easily when you make a mocha? Does our chocolate, if you're going to put it in ice cream, does it form a swirl or do you want little chunks? So the melting point and the smoothness and all the sort of technical aspects of our chocolate and our cocoa are part of the design every bit as much as the fancy packaging. So I'm going to take you back a bit to 1978. This is when Ghana was still ruled by military dictatorship. At the time, this was General Akufo in a string of what they call the coup years in the 1960s and 70s and early 80s. So my host father is in the back. He had 3 wives and 21 children. And I was going to offer free chocolate to anyone who could figure out which one I am in the picture. But it seemed a little easy. So I had this wonderful, wonderful host family in Ghana, and that's where my sort of love and affection for this wonderful country came from. And all of the Omanhene journey was really, in some ways, an excuse to go back to this country I love. So if you take the product, the design, a backstory, and put it together, you get an Omanhene brand. And that's a picture of our gift box. So, but it all starts with the bean. It all starts with cocoa. And Ghana is so perfectly situated for growing cocoa. You get 2 full crops a year, which is remarkable because I'm planting tomatoes, and any of us are lucky if we get You have 2.5, 3 months of growing in our home gardens here. Ghana, you get 2 full crops of harvest. This is a cocoa tree. It's about the size of an apple tree. They look like little footballs. Those are called cocoa pods. They ripen twice a year. You cut them open, and inside are seeds or beans. So a cocoa bean is really the seed inside. That's what we use to make cocoa. We ferment them at the forest floor in between banana leaves. That happens right at the farm gate. That's something the government of Ghana mandates. It improves the flavor. You can mechanically do this, but the way they do it in Ghana is still by hand at the farm gate. Then you sun dry the beans. Again, you could mechanically do this, but they spend about 3 weeks in the sun and they turn this beautiful, rich maroon color. We take them to the factory where we roast them, we kibble them, we squish the beans is really what you do. You heat them and pulverize them, and 2 liquids come out. You get cocoa liquor, which is the non-alcoholic, rich, viscous, deep brown, aromatic liquid that's got all the secret sauce for chocolate. It has the 300 chemicals that gives you the aphrodisiac quality. It gives you the euphoria you get when you eat chocolate. All that comes from the liquor. And what rises to the top is a clear liquid that's a fat. It's called cocoa butter. Cocoa butter is largely odorless, flavorless, but it gives you the wonderful mouthfeel. So the secret of chocolate is then recombining liquor and butter, adding a little sugar, milk if it's milk chocolate, and then you get chocolate, finished chocolate for eating. When you've pulverized your beans and you pull apart the pistons, you've expressed the liquor, you've expressed the butter. What's left is something called cocoa cake. It looks like little rocks, but it's like chalk. You could put your fingernail in. It's very soft, almost like sandstone. We pulverize that to get cocoa powder, which is the main ingredient in our hot chocolate mix. So I just wanted to show, this is when we started this in the early 1990s, it's all Ghanaian staff. This is our quality control staff, just so you get a little flavor of the first factory we set up in Ghana. And the sort of the happy result of this, if you remember the old Japanese chocolate bar, it didn't take long. My first export objective was to export a chocolate bar and hot cocoa to Japan, and in fact we did. So now Japan has Omanhene chocolate, which is indeed grown and produced in Ghana and uses 100% Ghana beans. So that was a big accomplishment for us there. And this is our staff in Tokyo. And if you do all this right, you get written about in books, which is very flattering. You also get to write your own book. The word Obruni, by the way, means a white person or a light-skinned person. So Obruni and the Chocolate Factory is the book I wrote. And what I thought I'd do real quickly is just pause and share something I wrote, because for those of you of a certain age here in Milwaukee, you may remember this. But I wanted to just share a memory, sort of food memories of growing up in Milwaukee. So growing up in Milwaukee, I associated commerce not with the color of money, but with the smell of it. Driving east toward the lakefront from the old Milwaukee County Stadium, you'd first inhale the musk of the Freighter Malting Corporation that for decades had served the city's brewing industry. I'd sit with my brother John in the back seat of the Pontiac station wagon, holding our breath. We'd be pulling faces as we next passed the Red Star Yeast Factory, with its decidedly unpleasant odor, made worse on a hot summer day. And turning north toward Green Bay, we'd be rewarded at long last by the glorious Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, with its magnificent aroma arising from what my brother and I imagined were copper vats full of burbling, viscous chocolate. So that's my visions of Milwaukee. You can do all that right. You get written up, you write a book, but the hard reality is tough to get your chocolate bar to market. So this is actually a check stub from Whole Foods. We had a test with them in Texas with 5 stores. And you can see the first 2 lines, if you see, are the invoices. We thought we'd make $8,300, $8,400. But that's not quite how it works, because Whole Foods wants a free case fill, so they subtract $5,500. They also charge you for a new item placement. And for 4 stores, it was over $1,000. They found one bad chocolate bar. They deducted 68 cents. They also had another MCBB, that stands for Management Chargeback. So to be able to use their platform to get purchase orders, we have to pay their IT fees to rent space at it. So that's $400. So we only got 16 cents on the dollar. 16 cents on the dollar. And so I tell people, what's that a recipe for? It's pretty much a recipe for bankruptcy. I was in Los Angeles trying to drum up new business at coffee stores, and I came across this graffiti, which seemed very appropriate, so I share it with you. Truth told, the odds are not in your favor. It's very much like the Hunger Games, isn't it? But that's what's going to make it such a great story. And the story for me wasn't over here in Milwaukee, because if you remember that value chain, I still was thinking about farmers. And the chocolate world, finished chocolate's a $130 billion industry. And cocoa farmers, the two main, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, get 6% of all that money. So I've still been thinking about there's something wrong with this picture. And if we take a very good year where cocoa is $3,000 a metric ton, a farmer is going to take home not $3,000, they're going to take home about a little over 2/3. They'll take 70% of that. Some intermediaries, truckers, and people that do the grading take a little bit. So it's still a hard life for a farmer. And we see things that, in Ghana, very similar here in Milwaukee, frankly, that being poor is expensive. I mean, you only have to, some neighborhoods, a gallon of gas is 20 cents a gallon more expensive than other neighborhoods. There are food deserts in Milwaukee, of course, where vegetables and fruits are either unobtainable or very expensive or poor quality. So we know kind of being poor is expensive. And the UN and some NGOs sat and they looked at what does a cocoa farmer need? They need about $256 a month. And then they have enough to buy books and school fees. They can buy uniforms for their kids. They can pay for their house. They have money in the bank for emergencies. Now, the hard reality is the income a cocoa farmer gets is $144, which means there's a $112 gap. So again, you need $256. The market's giving you $144. You got to come up with $112. And so we've seen various sorts of attempts to rectify this. The market isn't working in favor of cocoa farmers. So the fair trade model would take the $112 and just add it to the market price and hope people who are buying finished chocolate will pay that premium. And it works, but not perfectly, because a lot of people won't buy fair trade. They won't want to pay a price premium. The government of Ghana and Ivory Coast came up with something called the LID. It's called the Living Income Differential. And Ghana said, if you want a ton of our cocoa, it's going to be market price plus $400. Plus $400. Well, what happened is all the big cocoa companies decided they'd buy from a different country because they didn't want to pay $400. So how do we solve this problem? The way we came up was to see if we could reduce the amount of money you needed to feel wealthy. And here's how we did it. We're working on closing that $112 gap. So if you need a $256 to live, it's made up largely of food, health and education, housing utilities, housing rent, and then some money for emergencies. That's what makes it up. So we looked at the power of cell phones in digitalization, and is there any way we could make some of those expensive easier, faster, and cheaper, so instead of being $256, it was less. And the way we came up, there are indeed savings of about $132. Now, Ghana, even though it's got this wonderful climate for growing food, there's still parts of the year in between harvests. So what we decided to do is we could do weekly nutritional packages delivered to farmers so they don't have to spend as much money on food in the lean months. We can even, we started, it's in essence an Uber for agriculture, so you don't have to arrange to get a truck or rent a truck to take your cocoa beans certain places. We can do that and save people $26. Spraying as a service. So spraying is you're spraying fertilizer and insecticides, if necessary, on your cocoa to keep it healthy, to keep it growing. Well, if you have to negotiate for that one-off, it's expensive. But if we could come into a certain region and say, all right, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're going to do this whole neighborhood. And we can buy in bulk, and we can then save each farmer money spraying as a service. And most importantly, you've got a processing partner. Since we'll be your customer and we can promise we'll buy from you this year, next year, 5 years, 10 years down the road. So, and finally, the other one was in Ghana now, most everyone has cell phones, of course. Their cell phone penetration is larger than that in Wisconsin. So most people in Ghana will walk home with at least 2 cell phones. And then, so we're doing e-money right now. So instead of farmers having to go to a bank to get paid for their cocoa, we can preload it as e-money on a phone. So we do all of this, and that's why if you look at that final set of columns, the costs now to feel wealthy is only $124. You're making $144, so you're up $20. So that's how we do it. So when I wanted to just conclude by talking about rewriting the narrative, and I said the narrative has always been that America is sending sort of money to Africa because it needed it because it was poor. Wouldn't it be something if we could change that? So change it we have. These are pictures taken less than a year ago. In Franklin, Wisconsin, my Ghanaian partner who's there in the center, his name is Edmund Poku, of Niche Cocoa, decided he wanted to be closer to markets. And he wanted to put a production factory that would cost, it's going to cost upwards of $20 million in New Jersey. And I said, Edmund, you know, if you want my help, I'm not commuting to New Jersey. I said, why New Jersey? Why you're fascinated? He said, well, I went to graduate school in New York, so I know New Jersey. And if you look at a map, the distance between Ghana and the US, the shortest line you can draw is between Ghana and New Jersey, because it sticks out. So it's got to be cheaper. I said, no, that's not how it works. It's to move containers from Ghana to New York or New Jersey or Milwaukee is negligible. There's really no cost difference. So let's do this, Edmund. The height of COVID, I said, why don't you come to Wisconsin? Let's put together 2 or 3 days and you'll tour Milwaukee. We'll look at places and use it as a bargaining chip with New Jersey. Okay, fair enough. If you do that, maybe you could save some money. He gets here on day 2. They fell in love with a brand new purpose-built, a spec property in Franklin, Wisconsin, in the Franklin Business Park. They signed a 10-year lease, and we're off to the races. So we won one from New Jersey. This is the largest foreign direct investment, not from Ghana, but from the entire continent of Africa in the food and beverage space ever since records have been kept. And so that's why we had the Undersecretary of Commerce for International Affairs, the woman with the gray hair there, that's Marissa Lago, our Undersecretary. Missy Hughes was there, the mayor. I was very proud of Wisconsin to do this. And what's more, and so these are just pictures of it. This will be our powder pulverization line. It's almost ready to go. That should be operational this calendar year. This is some of the chocolate wrapping and packaging machinery. And a lot of this chocolate machinery comes from Switzerland and Germany, so it's the sort of top tier, most expensive machinery in the world. And we did this wonderfully with no incentives. It was just the talent of the people in Milwaukee, the workers, the space that we had. Interestingly, they signed a lease on a Monday, and then Wednesday, the New York Times has a little real estate section on deals that have closed. They always have 3 little deals at the bottom. And there was a deal for warehouse space, factory space, the exact same square footage. We have almost 45,000 square feet, 45,000 square feet in Queens. And it was for food production. It was an old building built in the 70s, falling apart, narrow little streets, not enough loading docks. We're in an industrial park. We have lots of loading docks, big, wide left turn lanes for semi-trailers. Our rent for a brand new building was a third of the rent for this dump that was in the East Coast. So Wisconsin has a lot going for it, and I wanted to leave you with that I think we're rewriting the narrative. I'd like Wisconsin to take a lead in attracting other African businesses that are ready to put manufacturing facilities here in Southeast Wisconsin, to welcome, to visit Niche and see what Edmund has done, because it's something I think we're very proud of. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Happy to take questions. Thanks.
Thank you so very much for what you do. It's really fascinating. I have two questions. One is, are you seeing any impact on your crops from climate change? And two, how are you addressing any concerns that you get about lead in chocolate?
Right. So climate change, there's a lot of things that are affecting the growing of cocoa, not the least of which is maybe more important than climate change for most Ghanaians is sort of competing crops and where the price of cocoa is. And it's not quite a transparent market. There's a cocoa board in Ghana, so I can't actually buy directly from a farmer. I have to go through the government. The government acts as an intermediary. And that can make kind of for complication. In an election year, for example, there are 9 million cocoa farmers, or 9 million people that derive their income from cocoa, and there's about 750,000 individual cocoa farms, kind of family size. So that's a lot of votes. So in an election year, the government often inflates the producer price, which is what farmers get paid. And if it happens to be over what world price is, the government goes into debt. So this, more than climate change so far, we're seeing affect the crops. The other is heavy metals, which first came up more in South America. Lead and cadmium is the other one we look at. We haven't seen, but I mean, so it's new for us. So it's something that the FDA never had us test, and to this day, we're not required to test, but the market's demanding it. So we're starting to do that. The other piece of that's kind of dangerous, Ghana has what they call small-scale gold mining. Traditionally, they were using some pretty harsh chemicals to leach the gold out. And so that's another thing we've got to be very careful of. Happily, some of the gold areas and the cocoa areas are not necessarily right next door to each other. So it's, I listen, the food business, every week there's some new challenge. And so it's something we really got to look at. But I would say Ghana takes climate change very seriously for a lot of reasons. Not the least of which, I said, it's the middle class is often cocoa farmers. It's 9 million votes. So it's a political, cultural, and when I talk at universities here, I'll ask if sometimes there's a graduate student from Ghana, and I say, did you ever grow up picking cocoa? And they'll say, yes, I had to go to my grandmother's farm or my auntie's farm, because it's matrilineal. All the land in the cocoa growing region goes through the mother's line, doesn't go to the oldest son. But they're sent on school vacations out back to the village, even if they grew up in the city, and they have to work on their little plot of cocoa, and that's their spending money. So cocoa has this outsized cultural influence in Ghana, beyond the economics, beyond even the politics of it. And so it's something that Ghana takes very seriously. Cocoa farmers have almost this revered status. So thank you.
Thanks much. I was wondering if you could speak to the importance of the legitimacy of institutions, both in Ghana. When you first traveled there, you said the political situation in government was very different. And so as we engage in international trade, how important are those institutions to enabling something like this to happen? And then secondly, if you could address a little bit the ethics and the thinking that you've done and how it's been informed over time by return of profits to the country of origin of the raw product. Thank you.
That's great questions. Sometimes the U.S. government has always had a policy of promoting democracy all over the world, which is a wonderful policy. Sometimes I think we ought to just promote good governance, because sometimes democracy as it's practiced all over the world is imperfect. It can be imperfect here, of course. So I'm always looking for good governance and open-minded enough to say in certain countries, at certain stages of everyone's economic ascendancy, it's going to look different. It's going to look different. And, interestingly, my longtime partner, Ghanaian friend, married an American woman, went to college here. So he had the golden ticket. This is during the coup times. He could have stayed in the United States. But Jerry Rawlings took over. Jerry Rawlings was a young flight lieutenant. He staged 2, he called them interventions. They were coups. He staged 2 coups. And that's when Kojo decided to go back, because he said, you know, Ghana needed a strong person, a very kind of iron hand to wrench it from sort of the corruption that it had been experienced under military dictatorship. So even though Jerry Rawlings was a military dictator, he felt that he had some inclinations, and in fact he did. In a continent that often has dictators for life, remember Idi Amin was famously emperor, dictator for life, and many heads of state served for 30 years or more. Jerry Rawlings held democratic elections twice. So he took over twice from coups, but then tried to hold elections. So I think democracy in institutions look kind of crazy. And for some Ghanaians, the impetus to move back to Ghana and invest their futures came when they saw really strong leadership that may not be perfectly democratic by a long shot. You know, interesting, Ghana now had to go back, you know, hugely embarrassing to the IMF. So they have IMF money that they always aspired to be a middle-income country. So, and this was done by an administration that many of them were educated at U.S. universities. And so, you know, I'm feeling kind of deeply, you know, heartbroken that people had the benefit of U.S. educations, went back and somehow haven't been able to deliver. So there was a second part to the question. Remind me, please. Yeah. Yeah. You know, so the ethics, you know, there's a couple of ethics. One, you know, I always think about the South Africa situation in apartheid, because when I grew up and I came of age, and the big moral question was, do you engage? You know, Coca-Cola, are you going to stay and try to make South Africa better, or are you going to pull out and isolate? So, you know, do you stay or do you go? And so that kind of, I always think to be involved in Ghana in good years and bad, or for better or worse, is just what I'm comfortable doing. But granted, other people could say otherwise. I've always been intrigued. When I look at that $130 billion, I see enough money for everybody. And the disparity of having these 2 countries, largely Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, get 6% seems astonishing. But maybe it's no different for cocoa farmers. You know, there's a wonderful cheese and ice cream industry. I mean, dairy farmers in Wisconsin, I think, struggle anecdotally. And yet there's companies that are doing Haagen-Dazs and making a lot of money on ice cream and cheese. So I think farming and agriculture is always struggling with how to play at the very bottom of the value chain. So these things are really interesting to me. I think if we can create wealth in unexpected places, and there's enough for everyone. And then, you know, the surprise was when Edmund says, I want to come to the US, I want to come to Milwaukee, I want to employ people in Milwaukee. It was astonishing. No one thought there's, you know, self-made African multimillionaires who want to invest all over the world because their markets are too small. As successful as Edmund is in Ghana, Ghana is only, you know, it's less than 1/10 the size of the US by population. So he needs to spread his assets around. So the US could be a beneficiary of things by engagement. So I sort of tend towards constructive engagement. Anyway, thank you.
So chocolate gets a bad name, or cocoa gets a bad name, but today we had 3 desserts. 2 were chocolate, 1 was citrus. The citrus is still on the plate, on the table. The chocolate won. Politics of chocolate. Schools are talking about eliminating chocolate milk at lunchtime, which I think is a horrible thing. And so my question is cocoa, does it have a place in nutrition? Does it have a place in solving world hunger? Does it have a place, you know, what's its future, and why do we treat it as though it's a garnish? I mean, the pictures you had were, you know, luxury associated, not, you know, not the commodity value of feeding people.
Right. You know, I don't think I'm going to stand here and say that chocolate is, you know, like everything in moderation. Edmund pioneered a fortified drinking. So the government of Ghana came out and they said, we're going to have a school feeding program. The government's going to pay for every child to get at least 1 meal a day. And part of that was Edmund came up with a fortified chocolate drink It's got vitamins and iron and various things, and now provides that. I think he's feeding about 1 million school children a day, which is why we became one of the things Edmund became in Ghana the largest operator of trucks, because you have to get trucks of all this to deliver to all these rural schools. So if you're ingenious with how you use cocoa, and it's not overly sweetened, because I think the cocoa itself, cocoa is quite bitter. Without sugar, it's almost, you'd wince when you tasted just pure cocoa powder. So I think cocoa powder, it's got some nutritional, it's got antioxidants, it's got some nutritional value. You can fortify it with other things, and then the attractiveness of it for children, especially if we can get some nutrition into them via chocolate. I don't see a huge downside as long as it's not a purely sweetened kind of beverage. And it's not. I've tasted this, and it tastes healthy is how I describe it. So, thank you.